Somewhere deep in the forest, under a sky that shouted with thunder, a girl named Aria ran. She wasn't simply running, she was running the way only someone truly afraid can run. Like every sound behind her meant danger. Like every shadow could reach out and grab her right off her feet. Every inch of her skin screamed. Her heart pounded so hard, she thought maybe it was shouting louder than the storm itself. She was barefoot, blood trailing in the dirt and leaves beneath her, each step reminding her how sharp the world could feel when it didn't want you there. Lightning split the sky above, turning rain into silver needles. The trees were thick, wild, and angry, their branches reaching out as if the whole forest itself was trying to stop her. They lashed at her arms, her legs, her face, little cuts and big ones, all stinging like secrets she didn't want to keep. Every time her foot landed, she worried it would be her last safe step. But safe wasn't even a word Aria believed in anymore. The forest was alive with noises, branches snapping, wind howling, the long wail of some animal far away. But the loudest thing of all was that awful crashing beat in her chest. Her heart, her fear, her everything squished together in the dark and the rain. She hadn't always been this lost. Earlier, before the world went upside down, Aria had stood in the Luna Circle, with the whole pack waiting for her to prove herself. The Luna trial, that was supposed to be her big moment. But she had failed on purpose. She'd stumbled, hesitated, made herself look small even though she felt the wolf inside, all burning and bright, and so ready to shine. She'd failed for a reason only her heart understood, and now the cost was pouring out of her in blood and tears and wild, living panic. Aria could barely remember how she got here. Just the rush and tumble down a muddy hill, the sticky heat inside her chest as her heartbeat tried to chase her wolf out. She could feel the silver fire of her other self fighting, flashes, glimpses, shivering heat just beneath her skin. But she couldn't hold on to it. Control slipped through her hands every time she tried, like trying to grab a dream that wasn't ready to wake up. Rain made the world soft and blurry. It made the ground slippery and cold, every footstep sending a new jolt of pain through her bare toes. Her hair stuck to her face. Her breath came short and quick, wheezing like she was pulling pieces of the storm straight into her lungs. It wasn't just the cold air or the sting of the night. It was something meaner, a deeper ache that wrapped all around her insides. She wasn't alone out here. That was the worst part. She could feel eyes behind her, could almost taste the hunger in the dark. Something was hunting her. Someone. Their footsteps were far, then suddenly close, then far again, silent in the places where fear made no sound at all. And every time she thought maybe, just maybe, she'd lost them, something new would crash through her panic and remind her she wasn't fast enough. Not this time, not if she only ran as a girl, not if she couldn't summon the wolf inside her. Her body wanted to shift, to stretch and change, bones melting into something faster, sharper, impossible. But she wasn't ready. Her own magic was slippery, her grief too heavy. She stumbled and nearly fell, sharp pain coiling through her calf muscle, but somehow she managed to keep moving. The pain made her dizzy. She tasted pennies in her mouth. She could hear a voice inside her own head, echoing with all the things she hadn't said during the Luna trial, all the words that burned when they got stuck in her throat. In every horror story, the hero has a moment where they want to give up. Maybe this was hers. Maybe the mud was too heavy, the shadows too thick. Maybe she should just close her eyes and let the rain wash everything away. But she pressed on. Every step was an argument against the night, against the thing that wanted her caught. Her wolf flickered in her chest, a silver flame not quite big enough, not quite brave enough to burn through. Aria didn't know if she was crying or if the rain had just soaked every part of her so completely that she didn't need to cry anymore. Tears and water mixed together. Every breath was half a sob, followed by the promise of another step. Her hands shook with cold and fear and longing. The woods felt endless. Her past life felt like it had barely existed at all. There, just ahead, the trees broke open and the ground disappeared. She barely stopped herself from tumbling over the edge. She was right at the side of a ravine, a deep crack in the land with water raging below, louder than every secret she'd ever kept. Her knees gave out. She fell to her hands, scraping her skin on rocks, mud, roots tangled like so many stories twisted together. For a second, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Could only feel the ache in her muscles and the wild, impossible hope that maybe no one would find her here. Maybe she was finally alone, but then, so sharp it broke every thought in her head, a howl tore across the sky. Long and hungry, impossible to ignore. It sounded like every nightmare she'd ever had, every voice that whispered she wasn't enough. It sounded like the pack hunting their own, the world deciding what to do with a girl who didn't want to be what she was told. Aria curled tighter, wishing, so hard she thought her bones might break, for her wolf to come and save her. She felt it flicker, aching and hot inside her chest. It was almost there, but not close enough to save her yet. Her hair pasted to her neck with sweat and rain. Her heartbeat thumped, fast, panicked, stubborn, refusing to stop. If anyone had found her just then, they wouldn't have seen a champion or a hero or any of the things the stories promised. They would have seen a girl by the edge, too battered to scream, too tired to run, but not so broken that she'd give up. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Somewhere between the lightning and the fear, she realized her hands were dirty with blood. Not all hers, maybe, but enough to make her wonder who she'd become and how she'd get through the night. Her breath shook. The noise behind her grew closer. The sky pressed down, hard as the wolf inside trying to escape. It would be easier, she thought, to let go. To tumble down the ravine, to become one more story that the forest swallowed whole. But that voice inside, the quiet, stubborn, wild part, refused to die. A wind swept past, full of scents she didn't recognize. Moss, rain, broken promises. The howl faded, then came back, closer this time. Aria squeezed her eyes shut, pressed her cheek to the mud, and made herself breathe. Just breathe. Just for another second, another heartbeat. Across the water, lights flickered. Maybe other hunters, maybe the end of the world. It didn't matter. Right now, all that mattered was holding on, was not letting fear finish what the night had started. She let the fear hold her hand for a minute. Let every muscle shake. Let the future fill up with maybe and not yet and please. The silver fire inside her burned for another chance. And then the storm did something strange. It softened, just for a moment. The thunder faded, the rain slowed to a hush, and Aria could feel every ache and bruise, every drop of her own blood pulsing against the earth. In that hush, she thought about her mother's voice, soft and stubborn. Telling stories by the fire, always ending with, "No matter what comes, you keep breathing, you keep moving." Aria did. She filled her lungs with cold, wet air, made a promise she couldn't put into words. You don't get to win tonight, she thought. Not to the sky or the wolves or the monsters chasing her. Maybe not to herself. Not yet. If you're here, if you're listening, take a breath with her, now. Hold it. Let it out. Feel that wild, stinging hope find a way through. And if you want to know how she survived this night, breathe with her one more time. Hit subscribe to Crimson Moon by Benny, because stories like Aria's, they burn brightest when you're right here with her, listening, hoping, believing that even on a night like this, some part of her story belongs to you. The shadow didn't come slowly. It didn't give her time to prepare. One second the night was full of nothing but rain and her own ragged breathing, and the next, someone was standing there, massive and still, like the forest itself had coughed up a nightmare made of muscle and quiet fury. Alpha Kael. She didn't need to see his face clearly to know who he was. Her body already knew. Her wolf knew. Something inside her chest went tight, like a door slamming shut, while another door opened somewhere deeper, dangerous, forbidden. She could feel the weight of his presence even before she lifted her head, even before the lightning cracked again and showed her the sharp lines of his jaw, the storm living inside his eyes. He was tall, taller than anyone she'd ever stood close to, and built like someone who'd spent his whole life fighting battles that left scars you couldn't always see. His shoulders were broad enough to block out the rain, his arms tense and ready, like he could reach out and stop the world if it tried to spin too fast. Dark hair stuck to his forehead, slick with rain, and his eyes, those eyes, watched her like he knew every secret she'd tried to hide, like he could see straight through her skin to the wolf that flickered and burned inside. "Aria of Silvercrest," he said, and his voice was low, rough, like gravel under boots. Not unkind, but not soft either. Just real, heavy. The kind of voice that didn't waste words. "You shouldn't be here alone." She froze. Her heart, which had been hammering so loud she thought it might break through her ribs, somehow found another gear and started pounding even harder. He knew her name. He knew her pack. How? Why? She tried to scramble backward, her hands slipping in the mud, her legs shaking so badly she wasn't sure they'd hold her weight. The ravine was right behind her, hungry and deep, the water roaring below like it wanted to swallow her whole. But she'd rather take her chances with the fall than with him. Alpha Kael, leader of the Blood Moon Pack, the rival pack, the ones her father had spent years warning her about. They were dangerous. They were enemies. They were everything she was supposed to fear. "Stay back," she tried to say, but her voice came out thin and broken, barely louder than the rain. He took a step forward. Not fast, not threatening, just steady, like he had all the time in the world and knew she didn't. His boots made no sound in the mud. He moved like a predator, like someone who'd learned long ago how to be silent even when the world around him screamed. Aria pushed herself up, tried to run, but her legs gave out. She stumbled, fell forward, her body too tired, too broken, too done. The edge of the ravine crumbled beneath her feet. Gravity reached up to claim her, and for one long, terrible second, she was weightless, falling, the world spinning into darkness and noise and the cold promise of water far below. Then his hand caught her wrist. The grip was iron, strong, unyielding. He pulled her back so fast she barely had time to gasp, hauling her away from the edge like she weighed nothing at all. Her body slammed into his chest, and she felt the solid wall of him, warm despite the rain, his heart beating slow and steady, while hers tried to explode. His other arm came around her, holding her still, keeping her from falling again, this time not into the ravine, but into the panic that clawed at her throat. For a moment, neither of them moved. She could feel the heat of him through her soaked clothes, could smell something wild and earthy, like pine and smoke, and the deep parts of the forest where sunlight never touched. It should have made her afraid. It should have made her want to run even harder. But it didn't. Instead, something inside her, something she didn't understand, didn't want, didn't ask for, recognized him. The wolf inside her, the one that had been flickering and failing all night, suddenly flared brighter, hotter, pushing against her skin like it wanted out, like it wanted to meet whatever lived inside of him. It was warmth and danger tangled together, a pull so strong it made her dizzy. She jerked back, or tried to, but his hands didn't let go right away. They held her steady, just long enough to make sure she wasn't going to collapse again, and then he released her, stepping back to give her space. His eyes never left hers. "You're hurt," he said. It wasn't a question. She shook her head, even though she was. Even though blood still seeped from the cuts on her feet, from the gash on her arm, from places she hadn't even noticed yet. "I'm fine," she lied. His jaw tightened. He didn't believe her. Of course he didn't. "You failed the Luna trial." Again, not a question. He knew. How did he know? Aria's chest tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him it was none of his business, that he had no right to be here, no right to know anything about her. But the words stuck. Because the truth was, she didn't know why she'd failed. Or maybe she did, and that made it worse. "You don't get to talk about that," she said, her voice sharper now, fueled by something meaner than fear, something closer to shame. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Rain dripped from his hair, tracing lines down his face, but he didn't blink, didn't look away. "I'm not here to judge you." "Then why are you here?" For the first time, something flickered across his face, something she couldn't quite name. Pain, maybe? Or memory? Something old and heavy that he carried the way she carried her own secrets. "Because," he said slowly, carefully, like he was choosing each word with purpose, "you're not safe out here. And whether you believe it or not, I'm not your enemy." "Your blood moon," she spat, the name tasting bitter. "You're the rival pack, my father." "Your father," Kael interrupted, his voice harder now, "doesn't know everything." The words landed like a slap. Aria blinked, confusion and anger swirling together. What did that mean? What was he trying to say? He took another step closer, and this time she didn't move. Couldn't. His presence was too big, too overwhelming, and part of her, a part she hated, wanted to stay right where she was, wanted to let him be the wall between her and whatever was hunting her in the dark. "Someone's after you," he said, his voice dropping lower, more urgent. "I could hear them tracking you from a mile away. You've been running blind, and you're leaving a trail they could follow with their eyes closed." Her stomach twisted. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but she couldn't. Because he was right. She'd been running on instinct and fear, with no plan, no direction, no idea where she was going or how to get there. "Why do you care?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, his body tense, alert. She could see the way his muscles coiled, ready to move, ready to fight. When he looked back at her, there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch, something fierce and protective and complicated. "I don't know yet," he admitted, and the honesty in his voice was almost worse than a lie. Behind them, another howl split the sky. Closer this time, more insistent. Aria's blood turned to ice. Kael's head snapped in the direction of the sound, his jaw clenching. "They're coming," he said. "We need to move." "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said, even as her legs shook, even as the fear rose up again, threatening to drown her. He turned back to her. And for a moment, his expression softened. Just a fraction, just enough to show her that beneath the alpha, beneath the rival pack leader, beneath the storm he carried, there was a man. A man who'd been hurt. A man who understood what it meant to be hunted. "Then you'll die here," he said quietly. "Is that what you want?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Another howl. Closer. Close enough that she could almost feel the teeth at her back. Kael extended his hand toward her, not grabbing, not forcing, just offering. His palm was scarred, rough, the hand of someone who'd fought and bled and survived. She stared at it, her heart torn between instinct and logic, between fear and something else she didn't have a name for yet. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said. "I'm asking you to live." The rain poured harder. The wind howled. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her choice. Aria looked at his hand, then at his face, at the scars she could barely see in the dark, at the weight he carried in his eyes, at the way he stood between her and the world. Like maybe, just maybe, he'd been waiting his whole life to do exactly that. She didn't trust him. She shouldn't. Every instinct her father had drilled into her screamed that this was a mistake, that blood moon meant danger, that she was trading one threat for another. But her wolf, her stubborn, flickering, barely there wolf, recognized something in him, something that made her reach out, trembling, and place her bloody, muddy hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, strong and sure, and the warmth that shot through her was so sudden, so intense, it stole the breath from her lungs. She gasped. And for a second, she saw something in his eyes. Surprise, recognition, fear, like he felt it too. "What?" she started, but he cut her off. "Later," he said, his voice rough. "Run first, questions later." And then he pulled her forward, into the dark, into the unknown, away from the howls and the hunters and the life she'd known. His hand never let go of hers, and she didn't let go either, even though she knew, somewhere deep in the part of her that still remembered how to be afraid, that this man, this alpha, this stranger who knew her name, was going to change everything. They ran together through the storm, her bare feet pounding against the mud, his grip the only thing keeping her steady. The rain washed over them, cold and relentless, but she felt warm where his skin touched hers, felt the pulse of something bigger than fear, stronger than doubt. Behind them, the howls grew louder. Ahead, the forest opened into deeper darkness, and between them, a bond neither of them understood began to burn. They moved through the forest like ghosts, silent except for the rain and her ragged breathing. Kael's hand stayed locked around hers, pulling her forward when her legs wanted to give up, steadying her when the ground turned slick and treacherous. She couldn't tell how long they'd been running. Minutes. Hours. Time had stretched thin and strange, the way it does when fear and pain blur together into one long ache. Her vision started to swim. The trees doubled, then tripled, spinning like shadows in water. Her feet had gone numb, which was maybe a blessing, because she couldn't feel the cuts anymore, couldn't feel the way the ground tore at her with every step. The world tilted, and she stumbled, her knees buckling. Kael caught her before she hit the mud. His arm came around her waist, strong and sure, and then he was lifting her, not roughly, not like she was a burden, but carefully, like she mattered. She tried to protest, tried to tell him she could walk, but the words came out as nothing more than a tired whisper. "Save your strength," he said, his voice low and close to her ear. And then she was in his arms, her head resting against his chest, the steady thump of his heartbeat drowning out the rain. She should have fought, should have kicked and screamed and demanded he put her down. But her body had other ideas. Her eyes drifted closed, heavy as stones, and the world began to slip away. The darkness came for her, soft and silent, wrapping around her like a blanket. But it wasn't empty. It was full of memories that bubbled up from places she'd tried to bury, full of faces and voices, and moments that had shaped her into the girl running barefoot through the rain. She was 7 again, small and wild, standing in her mother's arms in a cabin that smelled like wood smoke and herbs. Her mother's voice was soft, musical, like a song meant only for her. "You're special, Aria," her mother whispered, brushing hair away from her face. "You carry something inside you that the world doesn't understand yet. But one day, you will. And when that day comes, don't be afraid of what you are." "What am I, Mama?" she'd asked, her voice tiny and uncertain. Her mother had smiled, sad and beautiful, her eyes holding secrets too big for a child to carry. "You're fire and moonlight, my love. You're both." Aria didn't understand then, but she remembered the way her mother's hand had trembled when she said it, the way her father had stood in the doorway, watching them with a look that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't quite pride either. Her mother had died 3 winters later. No one ever told Aria why. They just said it was an accident, a terrible tragedy, something that couldn't be helped. But Aria had heard the whispers, the ones that floated through the pack like smoke, quiet and dangerous, forbidden bloodline, too dangerous, should never have been allowed. The memory shifted, twisted, became something sharper. She was 14 now, standing in the training circle with the other young wolves, all of them watching as the elders tested their abilities. Shift. Hunt. Obey. That was the order, simple, expected. Aria had been nervous, her hands shaking as she tried to call her wolf forward. The other kids made it look easy, their bodies rippling and changing, bones reshaping, fur sprouting, until they stood on 4 legs, proud and strong. But when Aria shifted, something went wrong. Her wolf came too fast, too hot, too bright. Silver fire exploded from her skin, not just fur but flames, actual flames, licking up her arms and legs, wrapping around her like a second heartbeat. The other wolves yelped and scattered, their eyes wide with fear. The elders stepped back, their faces tight with something Aria couldn't name. She'd stood there, alone in the circle, her body burning with power she didn't know how to control, and for the first time in her life, she understood what her mother had meant. Your fire and moonlight. And fire scared people. The memories kept coming. Faster now, sharper, cutting through her like glass. The Luna trial. Just hours ago, though it felt like a lifetime. She'd stood in the ceremonial circle, the whole pack watching, waiting for her to prove herself worthy. The trial was simple: shift, run, and bond. Find the wolf chosen for you, the one the pack deemed strong enough, worthy enough to stand beside you. Accept the bond, and you'd become Luna, second only to the alpha, respected and protected. But the wolf they'd chosen for her was Marcus. Strong, yes. Loyal, yes. But cold. Distant. A man who looked at her like she was a prize to be won, not a person to be known. She'd felt the bond trying to form, felt the pull of it, like invisible chains wrapping around her heart, and something inside her had screamed no, so she'd stopped. Mid-shift, mid-run, mid-everything. She'd let her wolf flicker and fade, let herself stumble and fall, made herself look weak and unworthy. The pack had watched in silence as she failed, their disappointment thick enough to choke on. Her father's face had been the worst, tight with shame, with anger, with something that looked too much like regret. She'd failed on purpose, and now she was paying the price. Another memory surfaced, this one older, buried deeper. She was a child again, maybe 5 or 6, sitting in the dirt outside her house, playing with stones. A boy had come over, older, bigger, mean in the way some kids are when they don't know better. "My dad says your mom was cursed," he'd said, his voice loud and careless. "Says you're probably cursed too. Says you're dangerous." Aria had looked up at him, her small hands clutching the stones, and something inside her had flickered. Something hot and angry and alive. The stones in her hands had started to glow, just faintly, silver light pulsing beneath her skin. The boy had run away screaming. Her father had found her there, tears streaming down her face, the stones still glowing in her palms. He'd knelt beside her, his face unreadable, and gently pried the stones from her hands. "You have to hide this, Aria," he'd said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You have to keep it buried, or they'll never accept you. Do you understand?" She'd nodded, even though she didn't. Even though hiding felt like suffocating. Kael's voice cut through the fog of memory, pulling her back to the present. "Stay with me," he said, and she realized she'd been slipping, her consciousness fading in and out like a candle flame fighting the wind. She opened her eyes, just barely, and saw his face above her, his jaw tight with concentration, his eyes focused on the path ahead. Rain dripped from his hair, tracing lines down his cheeks, and in the dim light, she could see scars. Old ones, faint but there, marking his skin like a map of battles fought and survived. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice so quiet she wasn't sure he'd hear. His eyes flicked down to her, just for a second, and something in his expression shifted, softened maybe, or broke open just a little. "Someone who understands," he said. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to demand answers, but the darkness was pulling at her again, stronger this time, and she was too tired to fight it. As her eyes drifted closed, she felt something strange, something that shouldn't have been possible. Her wolf, the one that had been flickering and failing all night, suddenly surged forward, warm and bright and insistent. And it whispered a name, soft as a breath, like it had been waiting her whole life to say it. Kael, not just his name, like her wolf knew him, like her wolf had been searching for him, fear and recognition tangled together in her chest, so tight she couldn't breathe. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was Blood Moon. He was the rival. He was everything she'd been taught to avoid, but her wolf didn't care about any of that. Her wolf only cared that he was here, that he was real, that his touch made the silver fire inside her burn brighter instead of dimmer. She tried to push the feeling away, tried to bury it the way she'd buried everything else, but it was too strong, too real, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a terrible, impossible thought took root. What if he's the one I was supposed to find all along? Kael moved faster now, his strides long and purposeful. She could feel the shift in his body, the way his muscles tensed, the way his breathing changed. He was alert, focused, like he could sense danger even through the storm. She forced her eyes open again, just a crack, and saw that they were no longer in the thick of the forest. The trees had thinned, and ahead, barely visible through the rain, was a structure, small, hidden, made of stone and wood and time, a sanctuary, or maybe a trap. She couldn't tell. Kael carried her inside, out of the rain and the sudden absence of noise. No thunder, no wind, no howling. Felt almost wrong. Too quiet. Too still. He set her down gently on something soft. A bed, maybe, or a pile of blankets, and stepped back, watching her with that same intense gaze, the one that saw too much. "You're safe here," he said, though his voice carried doubt, like even he wasn't sure if that was true. Aria tried to sit up, tried to speak, but her body refused to cooperate. The exhaustion was too deep, the pain too sharp, the memories too heavy. Kael knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her arm, hesitating. "I need to look at your injuries," he said. "I won't hurt you. I promise." She should have said no, should have pushed him away. But she was so tired, and his voice was so steady, and some traitorous part of her wanted to believe him. So she nodded. Just barely. His hands were gentle as he examined the cuts on her feet, the gash on her arm, the bruises blooming across her skin. He worked in silence, his jaw tight, his movements careful, like he was afraid she might break. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly, not looking up from her wounds. "I did it to myself," she whispered. "By running." "You were running from someone." "Everyone," she said, and the word tasted like ash. He looked up then, his eyes locking onto hers, and for a moment, the world went still. She saw pain there, old and deep, the kind that never really heals. She saw understanding. She saw something that looked an awful lot like recognition. "I know what it's like," he said softly, "to be the thing everyone fears." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, a sound broke the silence, distant but clear. A howl, sharp and hunting, cutting through the night like a blade. Kael's head snapped toward the door, his body going rigid. "They found us," he said, his voice hard. Aria's heart kicked against her ribs. "How?" "Doesn't matter." He stood, his movements quick and efficient, his alpha instincts taking over. "We need to move again." "I can't," she said, and hated how weak her voice sounded. "I can't run anymore." Kael looked down at her, his expression fierce and conflicted. And for a long, terrible moment, she thought he might leave her there. Thought he might decide she wasn't worth the risk. But then he knelt beside her again, and his hand, rough and scarred and impossibly warm, cupped her cheek. "Then I'll fight," he said simply. And in that moment, with the howls growing closer, and the storm raging outside, and her whole world falling apart, Aria realized something that terrified her more than anything else. She believed him. Kael never looked back as he carried Aria through the storm and into the heart of Blood Moon territory. His arms were strong and steady, but inside, Aria floated in a fog of hurt, a pain so deep that it made every breath sharp. Her mind flickered with old memories, flashes of flame, whispers of warning, but the world around her kept moving. The rain seemed to follow them, until suddenly the air changed. It thickened. Every step Kael took made her heart beat faster, not with fear anymore, but with something close to wonder and dread mixed together. The sanctuary was hidden deep in a stretch of old woods, older than the oldest pack memory, guarded by hulking stones, wrapped in silent moss and tangled roots. When Kael stepped across a broken threshold, the space glowed. Patterns rippled across the walls, runes too ancient for Aria to understand, but they hummed as if they recognized her. The stones looked like animal eyes watching from every side. Kael's heartbeat kept time with hers, steady and low. Kael muttered, almost afraid to let the words out. So the prophecy was true. Aria wanted to shrink into nothing. She'd heard about prophecies since before she could walk, old stories about chosen ones, about doom and glory, and battles nobody wanted. But stories weren't supposed to feel like sharp stones in your own chest. She tried to slide out of his arms, to plant her feet, but the sanctuary itself seemed to pull her forward. The air around her crackled, and the symbols on the stones pulsed brighter. She looked up. Kael's eyes were on her, soft now, worried, swallowing every emotion and every secret she tried to hide. "Don't look at me like that," she whispered. "I'm not what you think." Thunder shook the roof. Wind pressed hard against the stones, but the light inside kept her warm, almost burning. Kael didn't answer, not right away. Instead, he carried her to the center of the sanctuary, where a shallow pool caught the flickering light and threw it back at the ceiling. Aria staggered toward the water and crouched at its edge. The surface shifted and shimmered, and suddenly she saw herself, not as she was now, but as something else. Wild. Tall. Silver fire racing through her hair, crackling down her arms. Wolves bowed their heads to her. People scattered at her touch, afraid and worshipping all at once. She shook her head so hard her hair whipped water into her face. "That's not me," she croaked. "I don't belong here. I'm not sacred, not anything." Kael's voice was quiet, but it filled the space. "You're more than you pretend. The prophecy speaks of a silver flame, born of 2 packs, meant to heal or to destroy. We all thought it was just a warning, but the stones wouldn't have awakened, unless it was you." Aria's eyes burned with angry tears. "I was never supposed to be special. I never wanted any of this. All I ever did was ruin things." A pulse of light rolled over the pool and into her hands. She jerked away, heart hurling itself against her ribs. Every part of her felt wrong. Too loud, too bright, too much. Kael knelt beside her, shoulders bowed. "When I was a boy, I heard the stories of the girl with fire in her veins," he said, every word rough, raw. "They said she would decide the fate of the packs. I thought it was nonsense, until the first time I saw you shift, hiding in the trees, trying not to burn. You aren't a monster, Aria. You're hope." The pool clouded over. Aria jumped back, tears streaming down her cheeks. Not from pain anymore, but because nobody had ever called her hope before. Only trouble. Only threat. A loud crash shattered the calm. Kael's head snapped up. Shadows poured over the threshold just as Aria's arms and legs started moving again. Blood moon wolves burst into the sanctuary, their faces twisted with fear and anger. None of them looked kind. The nearest one, Varen, a beta with shoulders like a bear and eyes full of hate, pointed straight at Aria. "She's a spy!" Varen shouted. "She brings war with her own scent. She isn't welcome here. Kael, step aside so we can do what must be done." Chaos broke loose. Wolves bared their teeth, shifting at the edges of the stone. Aria could feel the old stories rising in their throats. Stories about violence, about choosing sides, about destroying what couldn't be controlled. Her legs locked up, rooted to the earth. Kael moved between her and the pack, taller than all of them, every muscle hard as stone. "If anyone touches her," he growled, "they answer to me." The room stilled. Even the stones pulled back. Varen sneered. "You're risking your future for a girl who should never have been born." Lightning chased itself around the runes. Aria watched Kael's fists clench, his whole body ready to fight, not just for her, but for something bigger. A promise, maybe. Or hope. The clash wasn't only teeth and claws. Wolves argued, voices rising, words like knives. Some said Aria was a curse. Others whispered that she might be the only one who could save them all. Aria's fear twisted into something hard. She pushed past Kael, backing away from the pack, her bare feet cold against the runes. "I don't want to bring war," she said, voice shaking. "But if I stay, you'll all be destroyed. I'm no hero. I'm not your answer. I have to go." Kael reached for her, his face full of pain, but she slipped past him and out of the sanctuary, her body aching with every step, her heart more broken than before. She ran until the stones and shouts faded behind her, until her own breath was all she could hear. The forest swallowed her, cold and endless. Moonlight found her sitting alone, tucked into the roots of a massive tree. It was peaceful here, almost, but the ache never disappeared. She hugged her knees and tried not to fall apart. Night fell hard and fast. Kael found her there. He dropped beside her in the dark, so much softer than before, his arm brushing hers. His hands were gentle as he bandaged her feet, his touch careful as he wiped dirt from her cheeks. They sat in silence, and for once, it felt like a blanket instead of a cage. Aria's voice was small. "I failed the Luna trial on purpose," she whispered. "If I'd bonded with Marcus, they would have chained me to a life I hated. I would have burned everyone, maybe even him." Kael's voice was rough. "I've watched you for months. I saw you control what nobody else could. They say you're dangerous, but all I see is someone trying to carry a weight that should have been shared." Their eyes met. For a long moment, the air between them changed. Thicker, sweeter, electric. Her wolf flickered under her skin. His wolf rose to meet hers. They leaned closer. The almost kiss burned brighter than her silver fire. Kael smiled, for the first time, real and soft. "I don't want your power. I want your truth." The words pulled tears from places she thought were all dried up. It would have been easy to fall into him, to let the bond take over. But something inside her held back. The last shred of fear. Or maybe hope. The peace didn't last. The warriors from Silvercrest found her before dawn. They dragged her from the roots of the tree, throwing her before the Blood Moon Pack in a jumble of mud, bruises, and betrayal. Voices roared. Silvercrest elders revealed her secrets to everyone. Aria was a weapon, not a daughter. Her magic was unstable, they said. She was meant to destroy any alpha foolish enough to claim her. Kael's shoulders shook as the council's words rained down. Betrayal shimmered in the air, thick with pain. Someone spat the old warning. "If the silver flame burns, it will destroy us all." Kael froze. For 1 second, Aria saw doubt in his eyes, a crack in the armor, the smallest slip. It cut deeper than any wound. Humiliated, Aria's own silver fire, long buried, always feared, burst from her hands and hair, wild and uncontrolled. The pack stumbled back, afraid. She ran, fleeing into the wilderness, her own heat scorching the ground behind her, the forest burning silver in her wake. Weeks crawled by. Aria survived by learning the rhythm of her power. She trained alone, teaching her body to obey, mastering the wild fire that had once betrayed her. Every scar became an old friend, every memory a lesson in what should be left and what should be claimed. But the world would not wait for her to heal. A new enemy rose, Elder Marok, a sorcerer fueled by hatred and hungry for control. He wanted Aria's power, to forge a weapon, to enslave every pack. He whispered in the darkness, letting fear spread like rot. Kael searched for Aria, searching not just for her, but for a way to fix what the prophecy tried to break. He found her just as the world was falling apart. But Aria was no longer the girl he'd once protected. Her eyes glowed, her skin shimmered, her wolf stood taller than despair. The final battle shook the ancient forest. Symbols broke and ran wild with electricity. Stones exploded, wolves ran as one, and Aria summoned everything inside her. Silver fire roared into the sky, burning brighter than every hatred. Kael fought beside her, matching violence to violence, hope for hope. Spirits awakened in the fire. Ancient voices whispered that Aria was destiny's choice, but only she could decide how to use the gift. She chose not to be a weapon, not for Kael, not for Marok, not for anyone. She was the prophecy, but she was not a cage. The battle ended with Marok's defeat, the forest breathing free at last, the runes pulsing with thankful light. When all was quiet, and only the last embers glowed silver in the ashes, Kael stood in the ruins and touched Aria's cheek. "Aria!" His whisper was fierce. "You are my equal, my match, not a curse, not a sacrifice." But the world was not done with her. The ancient spirits circled in the flames, their voices urging caution, their warnings sharp. "The war is not over." Aria turned to the wind. For the first time, she didn't flinch from her future. She looked straight into the bright, endless dark, as if she could see every possible path ahead. Her voice was soft, as if meant for you alone. "Would you have feared me, or chosen me?" If this story lit something in you, subscribe to Crimson Moon by Benny. This is where tales burn brightest. The world refused to end. As the morning sun broke through the wreckage of the battle, Aria and Kael moved forward, hand in hand, under a sky carved by new hope. But the earth cracked behind them, and from the broken ground, a new symbol, sharper, more dangerous, emerged. A final eerie howl ripped through the mist. In the distance, Elder Marok's last whisper curled in the breeze. "She is not the only one with silver fire." Aria turned, her eyes shining with the fire of every story that was, and every story still to come.